you could raise your standards. That's all I'm imploring you to do, is assume the best, start with a blank slate, assume the best until he gives you evidence that he's not the best, and then act on that evidence instead of coming in with that negative cast and assuming the worst in men, if that has been a struggle for you. Hey, this is Evan Marquardt, dating coach for smart, strong, successful women, your personal trainer for love. Welcome back to the Love You podcast. Today's episode is called, Do You Assume the Worst in Men? Hold that thought. If you enjoy the Love You podcast, please recommend us on Spotify and on Apple. Give us a 5-star review. Type in something nice. Pay it forward. If you really like what we do here, at the end of this conversation, I'll tell you how you could apply to Love You to find a relationship that makes you feel safe, heard, and understood. Without further ado, this is a story. Most of my podcasts come from coaching, right? This is not just me sitting in a lab concocting ideas. This is born out of real life experience, talking to women who are sort of walking anecdotes about the blind spots that come up when it comes to dating. And if you have had a tortured relationship with relationships, then I really want you to listen closely today. I gave a speaking engagement last night, and I can't begin to tell you the ambient negativity in the world right now. Well, what society is calling vibes. It's really just bad vibes out there about the news and social media and climate change and democracy and war, and it's all that kind of stuff. And that filters down to dating apps and the circles we contract to, where we spend our time talking to people who believe exactly what we believe and find further evidence to whip us up. Confirmation bias, that everything is terrible. Again, this is not on the script. I'm just winging it right now. We can say simultaneously, online dating is a shit show. Okay, if that's your experience, I'm not going to argue with your experience. I could also point out that 40% of all marriages start online. Those things are simultaneously true. There's no good men. Do you know good men? I know good men. I know a lot of good men. So how could it be that there's no good men? The good men are all taken. So there's only good women in the world? There's only one sex that has good people and the rest of the guys are gone? None of this washes logically. These are emotional responses to the fact that indeed, and this is another thing that's true, 90% of men, in my opinion, are not capable of being good partners. And they're out there, and we can't avoid them because they're everywhere. And they don't present as obviously bad partners. They can be cute, and they can be smart, and they can be funny, and they could talk a good game, but they're not selfless, sensitive, right? Kind. They don't have enough feminine qualities often to be great partners, or the guys are so stereotypically soft and have no masculine energy that you're not attracted to them. So we create this big Venn diagram. Okay, here's the guys who are selfish, bad guys, and here's the guys who have no attraction, who don't get me excited. That's not all men. That is maybe 90% of men. So we're looking for 10% of men. And the existence of this 10% of men means that you can find a husband, because all you need is one guy to justify this search. We just have to understand that we're going to be saying no to 90% of guys online. Not 99%, but maybe 90%. That's okay. So I want to start with talking about the negativity, because if you think the worst in men, that will permeate every interaction, every text, every conversation with a stranger at a party or a bar. Your beliefs, you could find all the evidence in the world to support your beliefs. And my belief is a little more neutral because I'm not as emotionally involved. I think most people are decent and they're confused and they have blind spots and they're doing the best they can. And most people in dating, it's just sort of collateral damage. It doesn't always feel that way, but I can guarantee you men are not out to hurt you. You're the byproduct of whatever he's going through. And I could assure you that if you go out with a guy and you reject him, you don't see yourself as a bad person for rejecting him. That's just the preamble for today's discussion. So today's story is about a client of mine who's also a lot of older clients, late 60s, early 70s. She's lovely, just a wonderful, bubbly personality. I won't give more information about her to protect her identity. But suffice to say that despite her warm, bubbly personality, she has a really bad history with men, very specifically starting back when she was very young, carrying out into a marriage that could be described at best as verbally abusive. And I didn't know her at that time, but she bears the scars of it. She's not used to being loved. She's not used to kindness. She's not used to patience. She's not used to people taking interest in her. She suffered for most of her adult life in a bad relationship. If you can identify, I'm sorry. If you can't identify, I still want you to listen anyway. She, because of fundamentally, one experience, like her marriage is her whole view of dating, relationships, and men. That's the formative view of how men are, is from that one guy, and I completely understand why. It just doesn't say anything about any other guy except for her shitty ex-husband. But she carries that lens around with her everywhere she goes, expecting the other shoe to drop, expecting the worst in men, expecting them to raise their voice, expecting them to get angry, expecting them to dismiss her. And so now that she's dating the love you way, she's having those beliefs somewhat challenged. So I've got my clients, they're Love You Masters clients. These are my higher end clients, the people who invest more money, get more personal attention, private coaching. I write their profiles. I pay for their photos. We log into the dating site. It's a real hand-holding type job. Women who have the means to invest in that. We have a nice tight circle and we meet on Wednesday nights. And as it turns out, a bunch of those women are in New York City and they became friends with each other in real life. I love that. I mean, I love when people fall in love and get married and send me baby photos. I also love it when two people who join my Love You program become friends in real life and take pictures of three of them hanging out at a coffee shop or something. That brings me more joy than anything. So these women have become friends, and they're in a similar demographic, and they're in New York City. And so the miracle of modern dating is that this client that I'm referring to, who came off of a really bad marriage and has mostly negative things to say about men and dating and relationships, found herself dating someone that someone else in the group knew. And her default setting, my client with the abusive background, was that this guy who she started seeing 2-3 times had to be a player. He had to be a jerk because she married a slick, disgusting, wealthy man. And her assumption is that those kind of people are all the same. Right? That's her world. That's her worldview. So she assumed she was dating another guy who was really confident, really slick, really well-spoken, really charming. So this guy has to be a douchebag. He must. He bears all the signs instead of just he's confident and charming, but fundamentally a nice guy. Those two things couldn't coexist. But because she knew someone from Love You who already knew this guy in real life, who said, no, he's a really lovely guy. Another person in my program vouched for the guy she was already seeing. And so then she went on another date with the guy after the first date where she's like, I don't think I could ever see this guy again. Right? Her Love You buddy says, go out with him again. He's a really nice guy. He's great. And then she went into the next date and she saw the same guy that she was like, ick, in a completely new light. And it transformed the way she saw him, and she saw him through the lens of positive intent. Instead of seeing the worst, she saw the best, all because someone nudged her, see him as the best. That's fascinating. That's just like a fascinating case study. Their next date was a better date, and she had more fun, and she was more comfortable, and she liked him more, all because she was basically told to. No, this isn't bad behavior. This is good. This is what confident guys sound like when they're not dicks. So now let's take that and overlay that onto all of your relationship experiences. You're not wrong for pointing out, and I'm acknowledging there's a lot of bad guys out there. But instead of seeing them as potential predators or abusers or tormentors or players or liars or losers, instead of just assuming that and looking for verification that your negative take on him is true, maybe go in with a neutral to slightly positive view of men. Start there. I give people the benefit of the doubt. It is what we call in Love You. It's not my terminology. We call it positive intent. Start with positive intent. Assume that he's a good person. Assume he's going to like you. Assume he's sincere about a relationship. Assume the best. Assume that he is innocent. Right? Instead of starting with the idea that he's guilty and he has to prove himself innocent. It's the way our justice system works. There is a presumed innocence, not a presumed guilt. We start with innocent, and if all of his behavior indicates that he's a bad person, well, you could act on that behavior. What you can't do is treat every guy as if he's a potential criminal and expect to prove himself innocent, because he can't. Remember, my client would have passed up a second date with this great guy because he seemed too confident, affable, likable, and she associated that with her, rich, shitty ex, right? Guy who put on a great face to everybody else at the club. And it's just not true. Every guy is an individual, and the next guy has nothing to do with the last guy. They're completely separate rolls of the dice. Imagine a guy had a terrible marriage. You've heard of men who've genuinely had terrible marriages. There's some awful women out there. I've gone out with enough people to really appreciate how amazing my wife is, because I've had the contrast through a lot of my dating life. And so imagine a guy has had a bunch of negative experiences, as most of us have, with women. Would you want him to come into the date and treat you as if you are his bipolar ex-wife, as if you're his gold-digging ex-wife, if his ex-wife who shut down and criticized him constantly and always made him walk on eggshells and nothing he ever did was enough? And this is the male experience. Would you want to be conflated with that woman who you've never met before? Certainly not. This is what we do. We carry our experiences. Right? We assume that every person is going to be like the last person. And this is why the central idea behind everything we do in Love You is that you don't have to fundamentally change to find love. You have to change your choice of men. If you're familiar with emotionally unavailable men or abusive men or selfish men or men who have terrible communication skills, and that's your comfort zone, we need to get you out of your comfort zone and try different guys on for size. Right? But we can't assume that every single guy that you choose is going to be just another photocopy of the combination of all your worst exes. You cannot assume the worst in men. Not only is it ineffective as a dating technique, it also happens to be untrue. It's untrue. If anybody, again, if you and I went out, right, you could say whatever you want about me, about my hand gestures or my voice or my ears or my hot takes on things, but I don't think you'd come away from this with this guy is an emotionally unavailable, toxic narcissist who thinks women should be back in the 1950s and they're good for nothing but sex and, making dinner. And you would never take that from me. Whatever the worst things you could assume in men have nothing to do with me. And I'm not by any means a perfect guy. All right. But my flaws are within the bounds of normal, which is why I'd like to think that I'm a decent catch, and I'd like to think I'm a happily married man. My wife makes me feel that way, and I know I'm not alone. Whether I'm in a majority almost doesn't matter, because most people are still going to be drawn to and accept unacceptable treatment from bad men. You just don't have to be one of them. You could raise your standards. That's all I'm imploring you to do. Is assume the best, start with a blank slate, assume the best until he gives you evidence that he's not the best, and then act on that evidence instead of coming in with that negative cast and assuming the worst in men, if that has been a struggle for you. If you still have trouble believing everything I said to you today, please go to www.evanmarckatz.com/now. Book a time to talk with me if you're ready for the transformation, if you're ready to enroll in Love You. I'd be honored to speak with you. I'd love to be able to help you through this. A huge part of dating and relationships is about belief and mindset and these sort of soft concepts, right? It's not which dating site do I go to meet a good guy. It's, do I fundamentally trust men? Do I trust myself? Do I trust my own judgment? And that's where most people struggle, and that's where I could be of service to you. My name is Evan Mark Katz. This is the Love You Podcast. Please share this with a friend. Give us a positive review on Apple. Give us a positive review on Spotify. All the things. I love you. I appreciate you. I thank you for listening to me today. I look forward to seeing you next week. evanmarkkatz.com/now to book a free breakthrough call with Love You to find a man who truly makes you feel safe, heard, and understood. Bye-bye.